Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is The Mummy's Hand, 1940. Happy October. This movie is sometimes called the sequel to The Mummy, 1932. However, it doesn't as much continue the story as it uses clips from the earlier film woven into another story to save money. This movie is not too bad as early horror films go. Any movie that has three archaeologists can't be all bad. Of course, one of the three is evil, which I find to be pretty consistent with my life experience. This movie is rated 67% on Rotten Tomatoes. At the time of release, the New York Times film critic, Bosley Carruthers, wrote, "Once or twice Miss Moran makes a grimace as if she had caught an unpleasant odor and screams. Otherwise, everyone seems remarkably casual. If they don't seem to worry, why should we? Frightening or funny, take your choice." Unquote. So let's go right ahead and jump in with the show veterans. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Former Cowboy star Wallace Ford appeared as Babe Jensen for comic relief. Ford was first covered in the Western, Episode 31, Warlock, 1959. Zita Johann was briefly shown in an uncredited clip as Princess Ananka. Johann was first covered in Episode 47, The Mummy, 1932. The great actor Boris Karloff was uncredited as the Mummy. Karloff was first covered in Episode 47, The Mummy, 1932. I was surprised to see the versatile Michael Mark as an Egyptian vendor. Mark was first covered in Episode 46, The Wasp Woman, 1959. Dick Foran played archaeologist Steve Bannon. Foran was born in New Jersey in 1910. He started out as a singer but was tapped by Hollywood to be a singing cowboy. He did well in B-movies, being Warner Brothers' response to Gene Autry. Foran's first starring role was in Treachery Rides the Range, 1936. Other films include Song of the Saddle, 1936, California Mail, 1936, The Petrified Forest, 1936, and Black Legion, 1937, A Tale of Racism with Humphrey Bogart. For Universal, he was in Rangers of Fortune, 1940, The Mummy's Hand, 1940, Rodham Cowboy, 1942, and Fort Apache, 1948. His work slowed after this movie. His last film was Donovan's Reef, 1963, with his buddy John Wayne. He continued to work in television. Foran died in 1979. Peggy Moran played Marta Salvani, magical assistant to her father. Moran was born in Iowa in 1918 to a dancer mother and father, Earl Moran, who was a pinup artist that drew many pictures of a young Norma Jean Baker. Peggy attended Hollywood High and performed in as many plays as she could. She began working at Warner Brothers and had mostly bit parts, occasionally in good movies like Nino Kachka, 1939. In the late 30s, she moved to Universal, where she was in The Mummy's Hand, 1940, One Night in the Tropics, 1940, Trail of the Vigilantes, 1940, Horror Island, 1941, and King of the Cowboys, 1943, with Roy Rogers. King of the Cowboys, 1943, was her final film. She spent her time raising a family and remained active until she died in 2002 at the age of 84 following a car accident. Eduardo Cianelli had a small bit in this movie as the High Priest. Eduardo was born in Italy in 1889. He studied medicine and graduated as a doctor. But he first worked as an opera singer, then an actor in Europe, and in the U.S. beginning in 1919. He made his Broadway debut in 1920 and worked for MGM by 1933. He kept getting roles as Italian gangsters in movies like Winterset, 1936, Marked Woman, 1937, and Law of the Underground, 1938. He was given other roles like the leader of the Kali, Kaliman, in Gunga Din, 1939, Mr. King in Foreign Correspondent, 1940, and an evil genius in Mysterious Dr. Satan, 1940. Around this time, his career began to dip. He would occasionally show up in sword and sandal epics, such as Attila, 1954, Helen of Troy, 1956, and Love Slaves of the Amazon, 1957. He was never far from the gangster roles on television or films, with movies like The Brotherhood, 1968, and Stiletto, 1969. He was also in Houseboat, 1958, with Cary Grant and Sophia Loren. He died in Rome in 1969. George Zucco, who I always try to turn into John Gielgud, played archaeologist and secret priest Andoheb. Zucco was born in England in 1886. Zucco began his acting career in Canada in 1908 at the age of 22. After World War I escalated, he returned to England and served in the army. He was wounded in the arm but returned to stage acting in London after the war. In 1931, he began working in British sound films and was quite successful. He went to America in 1935 for stage acting and by 1936 headed to Hollywood. His first American film was Sinner Take All, 1936. He began doing a lot of supporting roles in A movies. His range was challenged in films like Charlie Chan in Honolulu, 1938, and Arrest Bulldog Drummond, 1938. He played Professor Moriarty in The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, 1939. That same year, he was in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1939. In the 1940s, he began moving towards the horror genre with films like The Mummy's Hand, 1940, and other low-budget films through Producers Releasing Corporation, PRC, like Dead Man Walk, 1943, The Mad Ghoul, 1943, and for some reason, The Awful Voodoo Man, 1944, with Bela Lugosi and John Carradine. However, he was still cast in quality movies such as Captain from Castile, 1947, Joan of Arc, 1948, and Madame Bovary, 1949. Following David and Bathsheba, 1951, Zucco had a stroke. He retired from film and died in 1960. Cecil Kellaway played a Brooklyn magician, Mr. Slovani. Kellaway was born in South Africa in 1893. He spent his time in Australia working as an actor, director, and author. In the 1930s, he moved to Hollywood. It didn't work out well as he was only getting bit parts, and a high percentage of those were in gangster movies. He returned to Australia. Director William Wyler offered him a part in Wuthering Heights, 1939, and from then on he could find work. He is known for the film noir The Postman Always Rings Twice, 1946, The Luck of the Irish, 1948 as a leprechaun, Harvey, 1950 with a giant invisible rabbit, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, 1964, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967. Kellaway died in 1973. Charles Trowbridge played archaeologist Dr. Petrie. Trowbridge was born in Mexico to American parents in 1882. He graduated from Stanford University and chose acting over architecture. He studied acting in San Francisco, then began working in New York. He made his Broadway debut in 1913. He made some silent films during this time, such as The Flight, 1915, Thais, 1917, The Eternal Magdalene, 1919, and Island Wives, 1922. He went back to the stage for about a decade before Paramount signed him as a strong character actor. During this time, he was in many quality and lesser films. These movies include I Take This Woman, 1931, Captain Courageous, 1937, Meet John Doe, 1941, Sergeant York, 1941, Mildred Pierce, 1945, King of the Texas Rangers, 1941, Adventures of the Flying Cadets, 1943, and Captain America, 1944. His final films were bit parts because of his old friend, director John Ford. These movies were The Wings of Eagles, 1957, and The Last Hurrah, 1958. He died in 1967 at the age of 85. Tom Tyler played the Mummy, or Karras, but they used at least one Karloff clip. Tyler was born in New York State in 1903. Tyler kicked around working as a laborer until he ended up in Los Angeles, where he found work as an extra and stuntman. Good-looking with a good physique, he became a Western star. He was able to transition to talkies. He did have to work hard to lose his Lithuanian accent, which seems odd for a guy born in New York. In the 1930s, the cowboy movie market became crowded. Tyler began taking small roles in big movies like Stagecoach, 1939, and Gone with the Wind, 1939. He had a career breakthrough with Adventures of Captain Marvel, 1941. However, within a few years he fell ill with rheumatoid arthritis. Friends like director John Ford kept him working in small parts in films, and he also did some television. Finally, he could no longer work and went to live with his sister. Tyler died at the very young age of 50 in 1954. German actor Sig Arno played the beggar. Arno was born in Germany in 1895. He started acting on German stage in 1913. Following World War I, he continued acting and moved to Berlin. Because of those damn Nazis, Arno had to leave Germany in 1933. He traveled and worked in Europe until he went to the U.S. in 1939. In Hollywood, he played funny foreigners and other comical characters. He is best known for The Diary of a Lost Girl, 1929, Pandora's Box, 1929, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1939, and The Palm Beach Story, 1942. In 1955, Arno returned to Germany where he acted on stage. He came back to the U.S. in 1957 and only performed on stage. Arno died in 1975. James Crane appeared in archival footage as King Amenophis from The Mummy, 1932. I didn't cover him at the time, so I'll give him a note here. Crane was born in Illinois in 1889. He was a dark-skinned character actor on stage and screen. He started with silent films in 1919, and his career was over by 1939. Crane is known for Sadie Love, 1919, Wanted, A Husband, 1919, A Dark Lantern, 1920, and his most famous role was a small bit he did in The Mummy, 1932. Crane died in 1968. Harry Stubbs had a small role as a Cairo bartender. Normally I wouldn't cover him, but that name is just too good. Harry was born in 1874 in England. In America, he became a bit actor, but had a knack for getting into horror films. These films include The Invisible Man, 1933, Werewolf of London, 1935, The Invisible Man Returns, 1940, The Mummy's Hand, 1940, The Wolf Man, 1941, Sherlock Holmes and the Voice of Terror, 1942, Flesh and Fantasy, 1943, and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943. He died in 1950. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The movie begins with an old priest, Eduardo Cianelli, praying a curse for anyone that defiles the tomb of the ancient gods. Strangely, the markings on the outside of the temple look Mayan. The scene switches to a Cairo train station where secret priest Andoheb, George Zuko, is arriving. Andoheb travels across the desert and to the foot of the mountains with a guide. At the mountain, he goes to the Mayan temple alone. He arrives inside the Egyptian temple. The high priest tells Andoheb that he is going to die and must turn over the secrets of the priest of Karnak.
I have answered your summons, O Highest.
It is good you arrived, my son, for I fear I shall not see the moon sink beyond the valley of the jackals again.
Time has come, Father.
I'm ready to go, but first I must hand over to you the secret guarded by the high priests of Karnak.
The high priest takes Andoheb to a magical hot tub showing clips from The Mummy, 1932, where Princess Ananka is buried. Karras, Tom Tyler, is a prince that is in love with the dead princess. Following the funeral, he goes to the altar of Isis to steal the secret of eternal life. In this movie, it's not a scroll, but sacred Tana leaves. Halfway through the revival effort, the king's guards come in and casually arrest Karras. Taken before the king, he is sentenced to be buried alive. They cut out his tongue and mummify him. They place a lot of Tana leaves in his grave so he will remain alive. Karras was later moved to a cave in the mountains by the priests, and they have been watching over him for 3,000 years. They use him as an enforcer to protect Ananka's tomb. The high priest then shows Andoheb where the Tana leaves are hidden. He explains that the extract from 3 leaves each full moon cycle will keep Karras alive. Then, the high priest channels Dracula when a jackal howls, saying, "The children of the night." He says the jackals howl when Karras must be fed. The high priest says 9 Tana leaves will animate the mummy to protect. More than that will cause the mummy to turn into an unstoppable demon. Back in Cairo, a couple of Americans are wandering through the marketplace. Babe Jensen, Wallace Ford, is the comedy relief person. He bumbles along buying hip-swiveling dolls and cracking wise about going home. It never says if Babe is an archaeologist, but I assume not. Archaeologist Steve Banning, Dick Foran, is much more serious, combing through the marketplace for rare antiquities. Banning has been fired from the Scripps Museum in New York. Babe wants to work their way home on a ship. Banning gives money to a beggar, Sig Arno, and continues to shop. Banning comes across an old vase at the table of an Egyptian vendor, Michael Mark.
Effendi,
Where did this come from?
Arab find it far away in the mountains.
How much?
Very old piece, Effendi.
With very little haggling, he agrees to pay $75 for the broken vase. Calculated for inflation, that would be $1,315.28. Bannon is convinced the vase is genuine. The beggar is a little too interested in the transaction. Banning takes the vase to the Cairo Museum and his old friend, Dr. Petrie, Charles Throwbridge. I believe they're playing on the name Flinders Petrie, an English Egyptologist that lived from 1853 to 1942. Petrie developed a systematic method of dating strata based on the pottery within. So anyway, back to the movie. Dr. Petrie decodes the vase as talking about the Hill of the Seven Jackals, where Ananka's tomb is located.
This mark must mean a hill or a mountain. And these markings, translated, give us another name.
The Hill of the Seven Jackals. The square at the base of the hill must indicate Ananka's tomb.
They decide to ask Professor Andoheb. Damn, it's the same guy that was a secret priest.
Where are you going to find this Hill of the Seven Jackasses?
We'll go in and ask Professor Andrew. Professor Andrew.
Oh, come in, gentlemen.
Professor Andrew, this is Mr. Banning. How do you do, sir? And Mr. Jensen.
I've heard of Mr. Banning.
Well, thank you, sir. I had no idea that my work had attracted the attention of so great a scientist.
Oh, yes, I believe I have the facts correct. The Temple of the Sun in the Gobi Desert, the Inca ruins in Mexico, the last Himalaya city. Arresting achievements for so young a man.
Andoheb says the vase is fake and it's something that is sold to tourists. Banning does not agree with Andoheb. Andoheb also lets him know that 2 expeditions have disappeared in that area. He then accidentally drops the vase, destroying it. As soon as the group leaves, the beggar comes in to meet with Andoheb. Since the 2 archaeologists have very little money, no jobs, and no one to fund their expedition, Babe hustles drinks from a bartender, Harry Stubbs, and tries to sell his dancing doll. Babe is doing pretty well until he tries to hustle Mr. Slovani, Cecil Kellaway. Banning sees an advertisement that Mr. Slovani is there performing a magical act. After the hustle goes bad, the 3 men become fast friends and drinking buddies and proceed to get hammered.
So you're the great Sylvani. My name is Steve Banning, and this helpless Houdini here is Babe Jensen.
Oh, yeah. Americans, I take it.
Well, you don't look like a Sylvani yourself.
To be perfectly honest, I'm not. Up front, you know, show business. Real name, Sullivan. Tim Sullivan.
After being told about the tomb of Ananka, Mr. Solvani agrees to finance the expedition. The beggar is hanging around watching the men drink. Andoheb makes his way to the hotel where Marta Solvani, Peggy Moran, the lovely daughter and stage assistant to Mr. Slovani, is packing for the return trip to America. He tells her that Babe and Banning are con artists and are tricking her father out of his money. She has no reason to believe he is lying. Andoheb gets a little creepy at the end. The beggar incites some of the locals to attack the 3 Americans. They fight their way out the window. Babe and Banning go to their hotel room and Mr. Solvani goes to his. Marta is in a rage. When she finds out that their father has signed a contract, she gets the other hotel name and heads to where Babe and Bannon are staying. She takes along her stage gun, but later it seems to work like a regular gun. When she gets to the hotel, Banning is in the bathroom and she pulls the gun on Babe, thinking he is Banning. She shoots about 10 shots into the bathroom door and demands the money back. Banning comes in and takes the gun away from Marta. He says he's already spent the money. She says she will be going along on the expedition. Babe, Banning, Dr. Petrie, and the two Solvanis and a host of native diggers head to the mountain where the tomb may be located. They start excavating, and before too long they find the bones of the archaeologists that came before them. Babe is working with dynamite and blows the side of the mountain open.
Wow.
What happened? You all right?
I don't know. I started to hook a wire to the detonator to set off the dynamite, and here I am. Effendi! This is an unholy tomb.
The seal of the 7 jackals, what we've been searching for.
They mustn't touch it, Effendi. There's a curse upon it.
Oh, bosh.
It means death to whoever breaks that seal.
We can't stop now for a lot of silly native superstition.
I have waited a long time for this moment.
The natives all run away, saying that this is an unholy tomb. Doctors Petrie and Bannon break into the tomb with no regard or documentation. Andoheb and the beggar watch from above. The members of the archaeological expedition are confused when they find the mummy of a man and not Ananka. Dr. Petrie remarks on how well the mummy is preserved as a jackal howls outside to mark the coming full moon.
Jackass.
You wouldn't mean a jackal, would you?
What's the difference? They're first cousins?
Dr. Petrie decodes the mummy's name as Karas and knows he was buried alive. He also found a cache of tanna leaves. Only the head digger, Ollie, returns. Dr. Petrie is in the tomb alone, and Andoheb shows up.
Very interesting, aren't they, Dr. Petrie?
Professor Andoheb. Where did you come from?
The important thing, Doctor, is that I'm here.
Then you knew about this tomb. And yet you insisted that the vase was an imitation.
There are some things in science which should be brought to light. There are others, Doctor, which should be left alone.
Dr. Petrie takes it in stride when he should have been very alarmed. Andoheb takes Dr. Petrie to the mummy and has him feel the pulse while he gives the mummy the juice of 9 tanna leaves. Of course, the mummy grabs Petrie. I think in this case he deserved to die. Babe and Bannon run in to find the mummy missing and Dr. Petrie dead. Andoheb sends the beggar to place a vial of tanna fluid in the tent of one of the unbelievers. That's a kind of a vague instruction. Andoheb controls the mummy, saying he's the only one that can give him the fluid. The mummy heads out. Marta, because she can read, figures out where Ananka's tomb is located on the other side of the hill.
This right?
Just about.
And the first 2 letters of Ananka's name were here, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think that if her tomb were located near the mummy's cave, that her name would have been closer to it?
Possibly.
I've been doing a little figuring. Now, we found out that this square indicates the mummy's cave. But her name is way over here. Could that mean anything?
Well, it might mean that her tomb were somewhere behind the cave.
Exactly. There must be some sort of a connection between the two.
Instead of walking around to the other side, they begin trying to dig through the tomb wall. Ollie is guarding the camp when the beggar places fluid in the Solvani's tent. He hears it and goes in just in time to get killed by the mummy. Marta notices that all of the tanna leaves are missing. The Solvanis find Ollie's dead body in their tent. Banning breaks out the gun and tells everyone they're getting out in the morning. The beggar sneaks back in and puts some tanna fluid in Babe and Banning's tent. The Solvanis are going to sleep in Babe and Banning's tent while the men stand guard. Marta gets into silk PJs. The mummy comes down and chokes Mr. Solvani. When Marta screams, Babe and Banning come running. But the mummy has kidnapped Marta. They see the mummy going into the tomb, but he is not there when the men catch up. The two run back and the beggar tries to throw a knife at them, but Banning shoots him. They see the priest of Karnak medal on the dead beggar and now know where Ananka's tomb is located and that there is a secret tunnel in the cave. They decide to split up. Wait, what? No, stay together. Banning goes to look for the tunnel and he sends Babe around the mountain. Hey, shouldn't they have tried that on day 1? The mummy brings Marta to Andoheb inside the temple that is Ananka's tomb. He sends the mummy away and straps Marta to the altar.
Turn at once to the tombs of our ancient dead. There you will find a more of the fluid. Go while the moon is yet high in the heavens. Your power to move wanes with the moon.
Andoheb tells Marta that he is going to make her his eternal high priestess by giving her a large dose of tanna leaves.
I'm mad.
Steve Banning will find you and kill you.
If by some chance he should escape Caris and kill me, your peril would be great indeed.
What do you mean?
If Caris should obtain the rest of the Tana fluid, he would become a monster such as the world has never known.
As the mummy heads back to his tomb, Banning spends his time reconstructing a pot. Hey, couldn't you wait until you get back to the lab? Anyway, he finds a secret tunnel behind the mummy's sarcophagus. Babe makes it to the front of the temple, where he shoots a jackal, so Andoheb knows someone is coming. Andoheb has a revolver too! Not fair. Andoheb doesn't think Babe will shoot, but he's a cowboy, so he plugs him 4 times.
I don't think I would shoot if I were you, Mr. Jensen.
Well, if it ain't our old friend, Professor Andy.
At your service.
I'll bet you are. What are you doing out in the mountains here? Selling real estate?
Not exactly. I am here.
Where's the girl?
Where you'll never see her again. No, she's not dead.
See here, you Egyptian Mickey Finn. I'll give you 3 to tell me where she is. I'm not kidding. 1.
You wouldn't shoot an unarmed man in cold blood.
2.
If you were to kill me, you would leave at large a monster whom only I can control.
3.
Banning finds Marta and starts untying her, but the mummy comes in. Marta, still tied up, quickly tells Banning about the Tana fluid. He smashes one bottle and it stops the mummy. Banning shoots the mummy to no avail and then tries to block the urn of Tana fluid with his body. You know how that worked out. Babe comes in and shoots the urn away from the mummy's mouth. Cowboy. The mummy falls to the ground trying to drink the fluid. Banning wakes up and dumps fire on the mummy. The mummy burns, Marta passes out, and Babe passes out. Back in the Cairo market, Banning and Marta are looking at old vases the vendor has. Marta says, "No way, we're heading back to America."
Where did this come from?
I had to find it far away in mountains.
No more broken vases, dear. We're going back to America, remember?
Anything you say, boss.
Babe and Mr. Salvani come running up, and Banning has been offered a job by the Scripps Museum.
Hey, Steve. Steve, got a cablegram for you.
Everything got on the ship all right?
Yep. The jewels of an anchor are safe in the ship's vault.
Hey, what's cooking, partner?
Read it.
The job in the bone washing department is no longer open. Stop. I'm taking it myself. Stop. You're getting my job. Best regards, Doc Lyon.
The end. One thing they did good in this movie was to black out the eyes of the mummy in close-up. It's a great effect. World-famous short summary. 2 guys fight over the best-looking girl in town. I hope you enjoyed today's show. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at snarkymoviereviews.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All that I ask is you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.